when I began to look deeply into the relationship between human design and genetics is the only time that I began to understand how significant the abstract process really is. It took me a long time because I do not have an abstract mind at all. I have a very individual mind with touches of logic. The abstract for me, ideas for me, belief systems for me, are things that feel truly alien. Not because I do not respect them, because I do not know, but simply because it's not something that on the mental plane with my intellectuality that I can grasp. So it took me a very long time to come to grips with the power of the abstract process. It took me a long time to understand that it is not the antithesis to logic, but it is the ally of logic. And that I slowly began to see the beauty of the structure itself. You know, it's the beauty of the body graph. This symmetry between logic and the abstract. It's an incredible symmetry. It's like you could fold them together and they meet. And of course, this is one of the great jokes of quantum. If you live in a Newtonian world, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. I mean, that is the great law of linear truth. And yet the fact of the matter is that the shortest distance between 2 points is to fold them together. You know, if you have a piece of paper and you got a point here and you got a point there, the long way is to draw the line. The easiest way is just to fold the piece of paper and bring the 2 points together. This is quantum. This is something else entirely. And this is the only way that you can begin to understand that when you're looking at logic and you're looking at the abstract, it's like somebody sliced a watermelon in half. Because that's what it is. It's just something, oh good, Gennaro, thank you. It's just something that just got sliced in half. And until you understand that it is one thing, only then can you begin to see that transcendence is not about just patterns. Because it can't be. It's not enough. The transcendence in and of itself is the pattern established through experience over time. I mean, this is the secret to anything. If you have a logical theory, and theoretically you put it into a controlled experiment, that is not the same as letting it loose in the world to open experience. And we have seen that over and over again with drug tests and these kinds of things, where you have a control group and you think you understand what it does, and then you end up with thalidomide babies. Because in the experience, there are things that the pattern in and of itself cannot predict. That's the magic of the experiential way. And I began to see that because when you look at the relationship between the hexagrams and the codons, you get to see this funny 41st gate. You know, this is the start codon. The start of what? The start of it. It is the thing that gets everything going. Everything that is human. I mean, the thing that's so amazing to me is that our humanness, this very quality that is both comforting and disturbing in the Maya, that this humanness is all about the pattern being taken into experiential form. It's just like logic could be God's concept of what life can be. You know, but the abstract is where you get to see what happens. And if you think about the theologies going way back, it's basically what theologies teach. There is this pattern, and within this pattern lies the opportunity for each to experience the process. By the way, speaking of patterns, for me, one of the most startling things that the voice taught me was about death, and about the requirement that the human body should not be disturbed for 72 hours after death, so that the crystals of consciousness, the personality crystal, can return to its source. Now, isn't it interesting with the Pope? They don't burn this sucker right away, you know. He gets the full privilege. I mean, if you want to hear how hard it is, to keep a loved one of yours from being put away immediately, ask Nizarg, because she's just been through that. It's a real ordeal in our societies, to allow somebody who has just died the grace to have at least 3 days before they're put in the ground or cremated or whatever. And the irony for me, I'm looking at the Pope and I'm thinking, yeah, good for you. You're going back to your bundle, They're making sure you're going back to your bundle. No messing around. You're not going to be a ghost roaming this plane. You're going home. And they're all there saying, yes, we're going to pray you the whole way. Yeah, anyway, the human experiential way. So when we're dealing with the abstract process, what we're dealing with is that transcendence cannot simply be one way. This is what the abstract teaches us. And I know that from those that I have been close to in my own process who are abstract beings, that it's so obvious to me that their way is instantly different. Because there's a frequency to the abstract process that pulls your very uniqueness into its own path. And when you see the 41 going all the way up to the 36, and by the way, it's not my focus this morning. I will stay with the format and the power column. But I just want you to grasp something. When you're moving up there from that 41 to the 36, everything about that process is about the transcendence is the progress we are all here to reach. I mean, that's where we're going. Look, the 16th gate, the logical gate says you have to be able to identify with transcendence. You got to identify with it. You got to identify with higher levels of consciousness. You have to be identified with that. But there is no process, no progress until you actually live it. And it's the living that makes the difference. Over and over and over again, I describe, because I teach you logically, but I tell you to go out and experience it. Because if you don't go out and experience it, no matter how interesting or how nicely the pieces of the logic fit together, it's not enough. Not only that, when I told people to go out 18 years ago with this process, over the years what comes back is that what it is for them to operate correctly within their strategy has many different nuances. Each and every one of you in living your strategy recognizes things that are unique. This is the power of the collective, is that it brings us to an understanding that the mythology that all of us can wake up is what the collective is trying to do. I mean, this is the job of the collective. The job of the collective is to provide collective transcendence. Now, collective transcendence is a real problem. You got people over here that want to transcend this way, and people over here that think it's this. You've got the tribe. You've got all these people. Open up any esoteric magazine and you will see thousands of logical, mystical ways. Thousands of them. And what I mean by logical, it doesn't mean that the logic is correct. I mean, logic is just a layering of pattern systems. So you really have to see that the collective has a real problem. You're dealing with tribal density on one side. You have all these things you have to deal with. And then we know that the tribe is afraid. It's afraid of a collective Godhead. It's afraid of a collective transcendence. It's afraid of losing control. And the 41st gate says to me, everybody is the beginning of their own path. Everybody. That's the magic. Everybody. And then you see how it gets homogenized. You see how it gets distorted. But the magic for all of us is this understanding that when you take a logical pattern and you experience it in life, this is what it's all about. And the goal is not simply to have the pattern and the experience of what's already established in the mundane, but it's to be able to follow a pattern and move through an experience that's there to transform your consciousness. I mean, remember that the format energies go directly to your brain. You know, whoosh. I mean, this is this whole stream of energy moving up right to the top of your head. And it's the whole point. You know, this whole concept, the whole way we imagine, you know, we talk about higher consciousness, for me, it's just a physical joke. You know? I mean, you're just pushing it up there, you know, get it higher and higher. Get through this, you know, collective process so that you can experience your unique pattern and your unique way. So let's talk about the ways. And the ways of transcendence. And the ways of transcendence can only be found in one place. The 53rd gate. 53rd gate's an incredible gate. You know, this channel anyway, for me, always has carried a quality of, if you can understand the gates, the lines, the colors, the tones, the bases of this channel, the mystery of life is yours, you know? I mean, it's that kind of profundity that is here. And for me, the 53rd gate, you know, I've given it many, many nicknames. You know, the gate of needing to be free. It's about beginnings. It is the beginning. It may be, in fact, that the 41st gate initiates the movement on the way. But the energy, the pressure, the life force to actually be the way begins in the 53rd gate. Development as a structured progression. Now think about this. This is a fundamental abstract pressure out of the root, and the language is purely logical. And it's not the first time you see that with logic in the abstract. I pointed out the other day the irony of the 63 and 64, that the lines should just be reversed and it would all seem correct. And so here in the 53rd gate you have development as a structured progression that is both steadfast and enduring. I think abstract beings suffer every time that they do something and it doesn't raise the level of their consciousness. I mean, they're emotional beings to begin with. It's like, why did I do that? Not because it went bad in any kind of obvious sense, but because their consciousness gained nothing from it. What a horror to go through crisis and turmoil and emotional fire and all of this stuff, and you crash down at the other end and you can't even say, wow, I really saw something in all of that. You know, you wallow around in your pain and whatever it is. Enduring. You see, logic in and of itself cannot endure. Patterns change because we are mutative. They do. The only thing that can endure is memory. Memory for humans is something that is intended to last forever. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not talking about our individual capacity to remember. That varies, and it varies according to our design. What I'm talking about is the fact that it is us, humans, and only because of this abstract circuitry, that we actually take memory and concretize it. We call it books, writing, whatever you want to talk about now, film and this and that. We freeze memory. And we freeze memory so that experience endures. Endures. This is the magic of the experiential way, that transcendence is something that can be shared through the memory of experience. And that it's the sharing of the experience that is so important to the abstract. I mean, after all, when you get to the end of the abstract process, you get to the gate of revelation, 33rd gate, in which memory in and of itself, becomes the ability to reveal the truth. Difficulty with human beings is not what we take in, but what we can process and access. Every human being, with every breath, takes in so many things, far beyond our capacity in our neocortex to assemble the experience that we've taken in. You store 24 hours every day. You keep access to maybe 10 minutes, if you're lucky, usually 30 seconds. And every day that passes, there is more that you no longer have access to until it all begins to fade into the deep gray access. In the years that I toured, about 10 years of my life, I kept diaries. And every once in a while, I opened one of them up. And suddenly there it is, concretized memory, you know? I mean, I had long forgotten those things. Suddenly there it is. And this is the magic of the abstract process. See, the only way that the abstract knows how to bring about transcendence for the other, not for themselves. For themselves, it's a unique way. For the other, it's the telling of a tale. It's the sharing of the story. It's the prodigal. You know, it's all of these legends in that sense, mythologies, all the parables, every mystical story you've ever heard. It all comes from here. Knows how to bring about transcendence for the other, not for themselves. For themselves, it's a unique way. For the other, it's the telling of a tale. It's the sharing of the story. It's the prodigal. You know, it's all of these legends in that sense, mythologies, all the parables, every mystical story you've ever heard. It all comes from here. It doesn't come from the individual. The individual isn't going to tell you the story. The individual wants to tell you the knowing. Logic just wants to say, here's the pattern. Look at the pattern. Here's the formula. Here's the formula. Well, that's not enough. The abstract says, do I have a wonderful story to tell you? You know? It's such a good story. You won't believe it. You won't believe it. It's amazing. And off they go. And you see, collective transcendence ultimately is something that when you look at the not-self of it today, you can see that there are all these stories being told now in the collective. It's all fragmented. And of course, the whole thing about the collective is that until the collective has a single pattern that covers everything, you can't get to the point where all the stories are the same story. It's like my joke with teaching courses. You know, I teach a sex course and it's follow your strategy. You know, I teach a money course, it's follow your strategy. You know, you keep on teaching the same course, but you know, it's different. And ultimately, that's where the collective has to go. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get there. But you have to see that the collective is all about sharing the transcendence in a way that it is communicatable, and it's communicatable best out of experience. I mean, I'm a very private person, and yet for the last 18 years, I do nothing but talk about my family in public. You know, my kid has this design, and I got to deal with this, and I'm lousy in the penta, and I only do that because it carries more truth than what I'm telling you, because I live it. And what I'm describing is truly what I live. And it's one of the things that I recommend to teachers. You know, when you're teaching design, use yourself as a reference point. If you use yourself as a reference point, even if you have trouble describing something, they will feel the truth of it because you're living it. And of course, this is what the experiential way is all about. I mean, the difference between meeting somebody who is living their design and meeting somebody who is interested in design. Yeah? I mean, the logic can be satisfied in the interest alone. I know, I've seen it. But living it is an experiential process that's full of fear, emotions, crisis, turmoil, tragedy. You know, that's another movie, and it carries another frequency entirely. So the 53rd gate. 6 lines. The first line is accumulation. This is the foundation of the experiential process. In other words, this is its fundamental purpose. The purpose of experience is to accumulate experience. Isn't that nice? People are always wondering why they're alive, you know? If you're a first-line person, think about this as genetic continuity. You got a first line in your profile. It's telling you something about yourself. You're here to accumulate whatever. If you're a first line, you're an investigator. I've got, 10 first lines. I accumulate knowledge. That's my purpose. I can fulfill my purpose by accumulating. By the way, the accumulation of knowledge isn't necessarily the absorption of it, the experience of it. But if you go from this first line theme, the foundation of what beginnings are about in the experience of being human, it's about accumulating experience. Until now you can go on the internet and you can read about any kind of experience from millions and millions and millions of different beings over the last 4,000 or 5,000 years. We're doing a good job, according to this line, right? The beginning of the process. I like the second line, because the second line of the 53 is success breeds success. And it says something about our species, that if you don't accumulate experiences, if you don't keep on going through the experiences, if you don't build on every experience you have, you're never going to be a success. And that's not about material success. That's about whether you're going to survive or be extinct. We are experiential beings. People are always saying, look at us, we took over the whole planet. We did. Us and the rats, And I'm a rat, so it's okay. But hey. We're really good at building momentum. And you can see that because you ask anybody to describe the main feeling about the last 100 years, and they'll all say the same thing. It's going so fast. If you look at the history of civilization, if you look at the history of humanity, for about 3.5 million years, nothing happened fast. If you go back to some place in southern Ethiopia 4.5 million years ago, and you got a little hominid standing up for the very first time that ultimately is going to lead to us, it's going to take about 3.5 million years for that thing to grow a little bit, for the jaw to change, all of these things that happen. It's only about 85,000 years ago that the larynx dropped, and we actually had the ability to modulate tonal quality to the point that we could differentiate sounds the way we do. In other words, the potential for language. And that you can see that from the moment that we were given the potential for sophisticated language, it took about another 80,000 years to begin to develop a concretized Maya that was more than just the local valley. And that by the time we finally got to concretize that speech into form in Mesopotamia, maybe 5,000 years ago, from that point on, everything has been moving incredibly fast. We are naturals, humans. We're second line. We're naturals. We're naturals at momentum, which means that we are going to burn out, We are flying now. And you have to see, this is the nature of that 53. We keep on going and keep on going and keep on going. It's not enough that we could cross the ocean. We had to cross the skies. Human beings, man. Momentum. We're naturals at this. We were placed here in these forms not to fail. Think about that. The opposition of the 53 is the 54. The 54 carries the only mystical line of the 78 lines. The reality is that when you're looking at the 54 is what places pressure on us tribally to survive as a species. And that it is the 54 in its pressure that creates the fear that we call the fear of failure. Now, if you go back to the 53, that opposition to the 54 that fires up the 32, you will see that we are not here to fail. Not collectively. Tribes die all the time. But as long as there's something called humanity, collectivity wins. That's their joke. There's always a collective. But tribe by tribe by tribe is disappearing. That's why we have such a reaction in this day and age to tribes losing their power. We're here in Spain with Basques and Catalans, and they're all afraid of losing their language, their territory, their power, their tribal capacity. It's natural in this time. I like the third because I have deep empathy for the third line process, and I appreciate it so much. I see that the nature of discovery is a third line way. And yet I see that the inherent pain of the third line process, the trial and error, the mistakes, the pain that all that can cause. Because you see, we're not here to fail. I mean, the collective is not here to fail. It's not. And when you look at the third line in the 53, it's called practicality. Now that's not a third line theme. It isn't. It's a fifth line theme. What the hell are they doing stealing my theme, It's so practical to fail in the sense of trial and error. It's so practical. I mean, there is no other way to truly gain the right experience. I've got this thing about, if everything is right, something's got to be wrong, I mean, this is the third line mind. If it's all perfect, where is it wrong? I drove myself crazy in the early years, I mean, the last thing I wanted to do was, after sweating for years in hotel rooms, somebody would come up to me and say, I figured this all out. It's all bullshit. And I'd go, oh my God, you're right. It's like, that's scary, right? If you don't have the holes, the gaps, the whatever, you're not filling in the whole process. The third line experience is practical. It's practical for us. You need to go through it. It's good learning. And it's also practical in the sense of practice. And it's something deep within the third line being. This is where practice really, really, really brings its rewards. When you practice and you make mistakes, you can really do something with that. I mean, so often human beings don't recognize when they've made a mistake, don't recognize when a note just isn't quite right. It's very practical to practice the experiential process. It's like when I realized that, I had two young 1-3 sons, and all I could imagine is, bicycle accidents, had one, these kinds of things where they get banged up, that experience is dangerous for them, but what are you going to do? It's not like you can, cover them in styrofoam and, send them safely out into the world. There's nothing you can do. You cross your fingers and you figure their third line, they should be able to get up afterwards. And that you also begin to see that the moment that they are allowed to actually make those kinds of errors, even the painful ones, that they learn from them. It's one of the things I respect about third line beings. Third line beings on the whole, and I'm not talking about whether they're awake or not, on the whole, third line beings learn something from their experience. Often, what they learn isn't of value because it wasn't an experience that was correct for them to enter into. But if you enter into any experience correctly as a third line being, you have to see how practical that is for you. Whatever is going to happen. And there are practical advantages for you in going through that. The other thing is, I only have two parts of the abstract process. I've got the beginning and the end. I have the 41 and I have the 33. So it's kind of, everything in between is kind of like a sandwich for me to look at. And I've been asked many times over the years, because I was somebody that used a great many drugs. I experimented with a lot of drugs in my life. And there were always people who said to me, well, what did it do for you? You know, and do I need to do that? No, you don't. I remember some sweet woman one day sitting in Germany. We were having lunch together. We were in this place, and I take out a big chunk of hash and I start rolling myself a joint. And she's staring at this thing. And finally she got up the courage, you know, the guru, right? She finally gets up the courage. She says to me, she said, "What is that?" I said, "It's hashish." And her eyes get big. And she said to me, "You think I could try some?" I said, "No," you know. But anyway, so people would ask me for years, you know, they'd say to me, well, you know, practice. It's the best practice I ever had in expectation of the voice. Okay? It was practice. In fact, I got nothing from it except a deep, deep, deep isolation in my life, because I was in places people didn't want to go. But it was just practice. I had an experience with Datura, which is a very ancient shaman's drug. And it was a violent experience, and I was dealing with demons and all kinds of stuff. And I survived. I survived without going crazy, you know, and I'd seen people go crazy. I'd survived. Compared to the voice, there was nothing. You know, I had spent... by that time, I had spent over 20 years experimenting with altered states of consciousness. Everything. You know, I was used to being ripped out of what was the ordinary context and coming back somehow, because it's the blessing of my chemistry and my design. And I realized that my ability to survive the voice was that I had had lots of practice. Lots of practice, you know? And this is what this is all about, this third line. It says something about the nature of transcendence. We don't have this anymore. We have truly lost it. I had no shaman who could have pulled me out of my family when I was a child and taken me into his world and taught me the magic that I needed to know. You know, I grew up in a wealthy suburb in the West, you know, with televisions, and this was not the place where shaman are nurtured. It isn't. And so there was no real way to identify those beings anymore. And you see, so much of transcendence is that you do need to practice. You know, the whole thing about being yourself. You know, the magic of what life can truly be. In the practice of your strategy, it takes years. It takes years to get to the point where it's not your strategy anymore. It's just you. And it's the practice that makes it work. Nothing comes like that except shock. And shock, in and of itself, does not endure. Shock is ego business and individual mutative business. You know, what endures is what grows out of experience. Your process in design, and I know so many of you have been in it a long time. You know, what endures is that through years of practice, it becomes you. And this is the transcendence. So this whole business of the third line, to see the third line's beauty, it's so often, you know, we see the third line and we go, oh boy, you know, something's going to go wrong before it goes right. And to really see that something's going to go wrong before it goes right means they're better prepared the next time, each time. It's a learning process. You know, mystical people are always saying to me, where's the learning process? The learning process is you have to keep on going over things. This is the cycle of life. This is the cycle of the abstract. You go over and over and over, and each time it's different, because if it's not different, it's boring as hell. you keep on going through this process. Now remember something about the nature of hexagrams. That lower trigram, it's very self-absorbed. The first line, accumulation of your own experience. The momentum you build. The practicality for you in gaining the experience. Now ultimately, because it's collective, it's going to be shared. But this is very much wrapped up with personal destiny. But the moment that you're dealing with the upper trigram, and particularly the 5th and 6th lines, because they are left angle, then what you're dealing with is that you're dealing with a karmic process. And what I mean by that is you're dealing with a different type of geometry. And the value of experience is therefore different. So when you look at the 4th line of the 53, you get assuredness. Experience brings ease. This is not about practicing to get somewhere, which is a 3rd line personal theme. The 4th line is very different. Experience makes them secure in their ability to externalize. And what you'll notice is that the great experiential guides are 4th line beings. They gain experience, they become very comfortable with the experience, and then they network and they bring you through that experience. That's the way they share that collective process. When you look at the 4th line and you look at the 4th color, you see that the theme underneath the motivation is to be a master. It is only out of assuredness that mastery is something that the collective acknowledges. This is something very important for the collective. And again, remembering that the master is someone that can only influence those that are part of their network. They do not influence strangers. This is a very limited karmic slicing of the collective. It's the fractal lines that will go out of whoever that 4 happens to be. And then you get to the deepest understanding you can have of the 5th line. I think that the 53.5, I carry the 53.5 in me as a kind of mantra, because it's so obvious to me what experience means to a heretic. It's to be able to assert the truth. For me, this is the line of the pointing finger. Do you see? Do you see? This is the way. Do you see? See, the 5th line is there to call you to the experience collectively. But the call to the experience is not enough, because the experience is everything. One of the nicest moments for me is when my first generation of students reached their 7-year point. Because for years they had heard me say, it's a 7-year process, and you get to the end of the 7-year process, and blah, 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 blah. But it was all kind of mythology at that point. What could it possibly mean to you? And I didn't know what it was going to mean to them. After all, I had no idea. How could I? If you go through a 7-year process, and at the end of that process you've deconditioned and you're going to begin to operate as yourself, I'm waiting to see what that is. And so for a 5th line being, when you see, I mentioned it the other day, I got a very funny email from Alok when he reached his 7th anniversary. And I could just see my finger going up in the air. You see? You see? You see? This is the assertion of the 5th line. So what the heretic does is that the heretic is saying, this experience really works. They call you to the experience after they've been through the experience. That's their collective role. But they're going to stay with you and hector you until it's done, so that they can say to you, see? This is the way. A lot of strangers don't like heretics poking them in the chest with their finger. Something I've discovered. And it's, I don't want to get too deep in this. I could do line analysis of this forever. But the exaltation in this line is Neptune. And I mean, it's so funny, this deep, deep, deep spirituality of Neptune, and yet at the same time it can be so confusing. And for the heretic to be able to pierce through the experience and at the same time be able to call others to the experience and stay with them long enough to either be burnt at the stake or affirmed. I mean, what a thing. Right? And I never really understood the heretic until I understood this line. And I could see what the experiential process of the heretic was. Because when I began, I looked at the heretic through the tribe, because I'm a tribal heretic. So I looked at that through the tribe. I looked at the way it worked through the tribal circuitry and working its way up to the 5125, to the initiation, how all that worked. Because the examples around me were like that. The sannyasins I was close to in the beginning, Osho had a similar kind of configuration. So it was like, well, I guess this is the way in which the heretic operates. But I didn't understand the themes until I got to the collective. Until I saw that the collective heresy, which is the heresy that's for everyone, operates in a different way. I mean, it operates in a different way. It's not rooted in shock. It's rooted in assertion. It's very different. It's very different. Okay. 6th line. It's called phasing. The 6th line beings, they are carrying, in a sense, the real burden of consciousness in humanity now. They're under tremendous mutative pressure, much more pressure than they're actually designed to even be aware of. Because mutation slowly breaks down the laws. Mutation slowly changes the game. Mutation begins to disrupt. I want you to understand how important the abstract is. When a mutation comes, it's the abstract that will change the logic, not the logic that will change the abstract. It is out of the experience that we see that something has happened and the pattern no longer works. And it's only out of that experience, and it's going to be experiential beings who will notice raved children, who will notice a different pattern, who will feel certain fundamental patterns breaking down. This line of phasing is about the completion of one stage that ultimately leads to another. And in the mystical sense, 6th line beings are here to be our examples of transcendence. That's a lot of pressure. When I first started my work, I realized that I had a very special connection with 6-2s as a 5-1. And I began to see that the 6-2s actually had an ability to direct people to design that I didn't have. As a 5-1 heretic, I was automatically distrusted in the sense. I mean, if the 5 is suspicious, the other side is the other is suspicious of the 5. I mean, that's all part of the heresy. But the 6 was different. And it was different for many reasons. It was different because the 6 has been down there in the pit as a 3 in the beginning of its life. And that the 6 seems to have, in its very frequency, a capacity to guide without motive. I mean, after all, the 6th line, the 6th color is innocence. There's something about a 6th line being saying, you better build an ark, God said it's raining, and everybody does it. When the 5-1 tells that story, nobody's really sure. Some want to kill him, others think maybe it's true, it's this kind of thing. And what you have to see is that this line in the 53, this line is telling us about this mutation, this 6th line mutation. And it's really saying to us that this is what the 6th line is here for, to take us into a new experiential domain. And we don't know what it is yet. It's like when you look at the 12-6. and you see that the 12-6 individuality mutation, individual mutation that can bring mutation to others, that the 12-6 says it's time to have a metamorphosis and a totally new way of doing this. And here in the 53-6, you see there's got to be another stage to go beyond this level. So the 6th line being in going through this process, they're the ones in which the odds are saying you're supposed to be the ones that get there to show everybody else. And that means that 4 6s and 3 6s and 6 2s and 6 3s now are under extraordinary pressure. The vast majority are not self, and they're not taking us to another level of consciousness. They're not. That's what the 6th theme is about. It's always about that. They're up on the roof. They're looking over there. But the 53 says it's not just about looking over there. Go there. Jump. Everybody thinks the 5125 is the void. Oh, I've even described it as that. You know, the leaping into the void. But the real void? I mean, after all, if you start the abstract process, within a few steps, you hit the abysmal. You know, the deep, within the deep, within the deep, within the deep, within the deep. You jump into that hole, you never know what's going to happen to you. And here in the 6th line of the 53, you get the magic of the potential of the 6th line being to endlessly leap. Why do you think I talk about the roof? You know, this coming off the roof. Have you ever seen these pictures of, you know, these old film clips of people who were trying to figure out how to fly before we could fly? And they'd be on the roof of a house, and they'd have big bird feathers on, and they go running off with a little bicycle thing, and they fall flat on the ground. You know, this is a 6th line being. They're all up there on the roof with the feathers, and, you know, they're ready to soar. And they don't. They go, whoa. You know, and until they manage to get back up to that place, you know, it's like a condor. You know, you don't want one to land. You're afraid for them. You know, is it ever going to get back up? The albatross, you know, for me, that's the 6th line being, is the albatross. I mean, nothing more magnificent. They can fly thousands of miles across the sea. But that poor bastard, when it has to take off, I mean, what a trip. Miles and miles and miles. And this is the 6th line person. You know, they're up on the roof with these gorgeous wings. You know, they fall flat on their face. It takes them years, if they're lucky, you know, to manage to get back up in the air again. So here is what it's all about. You know, you have to see, you got to get past it's like the whole cycle of design. The next thing is my 14-year students, because I know how different it was for me to go through my first 7 years and then to go through my next 7 years. Because after all, when you decondition yourself as an adult, which is quite a process, I mean, not everybody can do this. You know, you decondition yourself as an adult and you finally get to that point and you go, whew, and yes, it's more comfortable, and yes, it's easier, and yes, it's nice, and then it starts. I mean, that's when it starts. You know, and then you go through the first 7 years of the start part, and you think, okay, now, you know, this is really cool, now, and then the next one begins. I mean, after all, this is what the 6th line tells us. Each stage, you go through the process, and you raise your consciousness with each stage that you complete. You know, everything that you need to understand about what it is to expand consciousness is here, just in this hexagram. It's the magic. And if you want to be a biologist, go take a look at this codon and take a look at its chemistry. Because in that chemistry is the miracle of collective transcendence. You take all those 6 lines together, you fulfill them correctly through beings who are correct, And we'll finally get to see how, as a collective, we can find that transcendence together. I'm not suggesting, by the way, because I am deeply practical, I am not suggesting that's about to happen. I don't think that that's even conceivable. And when I know certainly that there's not enough time for any of that. But it is our process. You know, there is no scorecard. The gods don't have a scorecard. They really don't. I mean, you know, if we all go to hell in a handbasket, it's not like we failed. It isn't, because that's not what this is about. You can only have that perception because we're locked into this binary, this and that, good and bad, right and wrong, and all that stuff. It's simply to see that consciousness in form is a miracle. However you want to talk about these things. You know? Consciousness in form is really an incredible thing. And that once we are consciousness in form, that we have this momentum that has been building through our entire evolution, that we can transcend the limitations of the form through the consciousness itself. That rather than the form being a trap, that the form becomes the amplification of our consciousness. That rather than being sealed off in the illusion of separateness, that we are finally porous to the oneness of everything. You know, all of this mystical stuff. Well, it's collective. That's why our work is so mundane. Our practical work in the world is so mundane. Because that's where the truth is. You know, it's not about all of the spectacular tribal ceremonies and philosophies. It's about the day-to-day operation in the world as oneself. You know, this is what we're here for. And of course, this is the whole thing about the collective experience and the collective experiment. Okay, I won't get stuck in the 53 forever. At its simple level, it is a gate of beginnings, and that means that it creates an enormous amount of pressure. You know, I talk about the format energies being connected to depression, and that again our understanding of depression is quite limited. There's very few channels that have such a polarity. I mean, a cycle is not 2 points. I mean, that's not what a cycle is. A cycle is not a beginning and an end, unless there's a middle. You know, this is the whole thing about what happens here in this channel of maturation. The pressure is always to start. It's always there in the 53. Let's get it going. And of course, if there's nothing to start, it can be quite depressed. But the 42 alone is always saying, let's get it over with. You know, let's finish it. Remember, the undefined strategy of the sacral, the open sacral, is not knowing when enough is enough. The 42nd gate knows when enough is enough all the time. It's always ready to say, let's finish this now. But of course, if it doesn't have a new beginning, it can't finish. You know, it's like the women who used to come to see me and they only had the 42nd gate, and they were in the 5th or 6th or 7th or 8th or 9th year of their relationship, and they really wanted out and they couldn't get out. There's no way to get out. You can't get out. The 42 is a real trap. And the moment that you have the whole thing, you know, it's not this or that anymore. That's when you really have the cycle, the cyclical power as a format. And it's this cyclical power that is driving us to go through experience after experience after experience. Have you ever noticed? I get up every day and I do the same thing. Don't we all? So much of what we call our lives is a repetition of yesterday with a few variations. I mean, after all, we all know that. As a matter of fact, many human beings find that kind of process to be frightening and intimidating, you know, and boring, and you want to get out of it and you want to change it and you can't stand it. I'm doing the same thing every day, every day, every day, every day, every day. That's the human experiential way, folks. You know? It's called practice. It really is. Day after day. You can't imagine how good I've become at making my breakfast in the morning. You know? I've had all this practice, all these years. I know where everything is. I tell you, if you've ever seen an ego manifester make breakfast, if you film it, you've got to slow it down to get the blurs out of the way. You know, I can fry 2 eggs and toast and put it on a plate and eat it and wash it faster than most people can wake up. You know? Gone, done, shoom. You know? Practice. It's great. I mean, by the time I had my 3rd child, I was beginning to be really good as a father. Practice. It's the human way. You know, by the time I had my 4th wife, I was good at being a husband. Practice. It's the human way. And you see, we think the practice is terrible. The not self is bored with all that. I don't do that. It's a terrible life. I need a vacation. And then you take the same vacation you took the year before, right? The exact same thing, right? You go to the hotel. I mean, that's life. There was this wonderful Jacques Tati. He was a very wonderful French director in the 30s and 40s. He had this character of his who never said anything, who was hilarious. And there was this wonderful scene where he had to travel from airport to airport. And he was always lost because they were all the same. I mean, it didn't matter what country you were in. You know, it was all the same. You know, this is what the collective brings us. You know, until there are these patterns that everyone begins to experience. And you begin to practice at it. I mean, there's people practicing Halloween. When I arrived in Europe, nobody celebrated Halloween. Nobody. I mean, it wasn't on the calendar. Kids didn't run around and knock on your door. There were no funny masks. And now, there's Halloween, you know? This is the way the collective works. And then you practice. You know, you practice at whatever it is. It's this repetition in life that is so uncomfortable for most people because they don't appreciate it. There isn't much for us to do. You know? I mean, think about it. There really isn't much to do. Most people's lives are very limited. There's not a hell of a lot to do. You know, you might be lucky enough to have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people in your life that you really care about, that really care about you. You probably end up most of your life basically thinking about the same things, doing the same things, working at the same place, looking at the same person. I mean, it just goes on that way. That is this life. That is the mundane plane. The mundane plane is the living abstract environment. And it's all boring. It is. I know. But then again, it isn't. It all depends on how you see it. It just depends on how you see it. Everything about consciousness is seen. You know, it's so obvious to me that these mundane things that you keep on doing over and over and over again have a value in and of themselves. The longer you do something, the less you have to think. I mean, it's one of the things you get to notice. When I first started to play the guitar, I always had to think about where my hands were. You know, 45 years later, I don't even think about whether my hands are even playing. Because you don't have to. Practice. And you see, for me, everything is like the guitar. I mean, many years ago in the countryside, I had a very strange experience. I was long before human design. And I was very, very, very drugged. LSD, I think. And I was in a kitchen of a friend's house. And I can't stand dirty kitchens. I mean, I can't stand them. I mean, I can't eat in a kitchen that has dirty dishes in it. And I walked into this kitchen and it looked like the Holocaust, you know. And in the peak of my trip, I begin to clean all this kitchen. And I had all these dishes. I had more dishes than space, right? So I suddenly get into this very slow motion Zen game of placing all the clean dishes in patterns and all of this stuff. I got down on my knees and was polishing the floor, and that kitchen, it was incredible. And I walked out of there and I thought, days later, it was one of the most beautiful things I had ever done. I mean, really. And it was the most, it's just cleaning. It was so beautiful. From that point on in my life, I never again ever resented or felt bad about going into my kitchen and cleaning my kitchen, and cleaning the dishes. There's some very basic magic. And every time that I do it, when I'm finished, I feel so good. Now, it's not about anything. It's just, I just cleaned some dishes. But it feels as good to me as somebody walking by me and smiling. You know what I mean? It's not a big deal. It's this little thing. And you see, until we can capture the beauty in the little things of our lives. I mean, it's what the taming power of the small teaches us. The little things, to pay attention to the little things, because all of these little things carry magic with them. And it's not obvious magic. It doesn't have to be. But you see, the moment there is resistance in you to what life is, there's something that you're cut off from. And whether that's screaming children and diapers and this and that and God knows what, because there's all these things in life. The computer that suddenly dies in front of you. All of the things that go on. That there is this magic in all of it. I mean, this is the greatest discovery for you. It's why I love my life at home, because it's so mundane. I mean, deeply mundane. And yet it's the most magical environment I've ever lived in. And this is the lesson. It doesn't matter for me now whether it's, all that outside stuff. I see that awakeness, I see that the beauty of life is in the tiny, tiny, tiny little mundane things. Nothing more. The rest of it, it just makes for good movies, So the abstract, that's what it's here to tell us. The great teaching of the abstract process is any experience can lead to transcendence. If you hear the stories of many people that have had mystical experiences, in taxi cabs, falling down a flight of stairs, standing in a subway station. People have them in all these mundane situations because the triggers are everywhere. They're everywhere. And you see, most people think that they look for transcendence in places that are advertised. Get your transcendence here, $25 an hour, And it's not. Transcendence shows up while you're having a crap. Transcendence shows up when you fall down on the street. I mean, transcendence is always waiting. Any moment. That's the beauty. And the abstract tells you that. It says, look, just keep on doing it because you never know. I mean, just keep on, just do it, you never know. And don't look for it. It's the great teaching of the abstract because nothing is more existential than the abstract process. Nothing. I mean, it's what's so frightening about the abstract process is that it seems that somebody's very dense. It's like, what are you washing those dishes for when you could be doing a meditation over here? Or, I mean, they seem. The 42nd gate, the first line is diversification. You accumulate to diversify. Out of the accumulation of experience comes the diversification of experience. And we are a great diversity. As I said, if you really want to understand the nature of being, here's your place. You look at these two gates. You can learn so much from them. Momentum leads to identification. To be able to identify specific experiences, to be able to identify the gains from the experiences, to be identified with the experience. He's the guy that had an encounter with the voice. You're identified with the experience. And then the experience becomes a story. Well, late at night one day. The third line is trial and error. It is practical, and practicality leads to trial and error because that's just the way it is. If there were no trial and error, there'd be nothing to practice. I mean, it's one of the things that's so clear to me, is that in order to get to a point of eliminating resistance, you need to reach a place of perfection in any act. In any act. I mean, that's the thing that's so interesting, is that these variations from perfection are what we're moving through as we practice. And it doesn't matter whether you're practicing, a concert instrument or you're practicing how to type. It doesn't matter what the hell it is. It doesn't matter what the thing is. It doesn't matter what the action is. It doesn't matter what you think, the goal, the purpose. It's just the act of doing it that carries the magic. I always tell abstract beings the same thing. Be in the experience. Think about it later. Be in it. This is the only circuit that says that. See, everybody thinks that because individuality is rooted in the 20th gate, which is an existential gate that says, I am now. Individuality is rarely existential in its application in life. Most of the time, it's cognition in the now. But you see, the abstract is not here for cognition in the now. The abstract is here only to be able to grasp after the experience. And essentially, it is only abstract beings who truly operate existentially, or should, in that sense, be totally absorbed in their process. It's only when you're absorbed in that process that you can go back after and look at it and learn. And learn. And if you stop in the middle, it's like playing an instrument. If you stop in the middle and say, oh, that was a bad note, and then you start again, no. Because every time afterwards, you get stuck in the same place. And anyone who's ever practiced an instrument knows that. You cannot do that. You set up a block in your own brain that'll just stop at that place again. Yeah? All you have to do is go through to the end. It's clear that there was something that went wrong, but go through to the end. Don't stop. And then you can look at what the error was, and then you can deal with that, and then start from the beginning again and go through it. And you'll see, you'll go by it, everything will be fine. Experiential learning is reflection. It's why the experiential process ends with the 1333, with the prodigal, with the witness, with revelation and remembrance. You have to do it first in order to have that reflection and memory. When we get to the upper trigram of the 42, many of you know about juxtaposition theory, which is the physics of human design cosmology or rave cosmology. And I was living in a little pension near San Juan, the north end of the island. And one day, in my thinking process, I wanted to find a way to put down on paper what the voice had told me about cosmology. And nothing happened. It was sort of like something went through. It was like me trying to tell my unconscious what to do, and it wasn't paying any attention. And in that era, I was. Because the I Ching had been something that was very new to me, I was doing meditations on hexagrams. And my kind of meditation on a hexagram is that I would read the original, that is the Chinese original, and then I would think about it in the context of the knowledge I was given, and I would write my own commentaries. It was a precursor to me eventually writing the Rei Vi Ching, in a sense. And that day, and the way I did it is I just randomly opened the book and just would, and I open up the book and I come to the 42nd hexagram and I come to the 4th line. And the moment that I read the original, I'm not going to go through all that now, but the moment I read the original, I understood completely juxtaposition. It was one of the funniest experiences I've ever had. I had an incredible satori. I spent the next 3 days without sleep in a kind of dervish of description. Writing like a madman. And all of that because I looked at the 42nd gate, the 4th line. And every time I look at this line from then on, it's sort of like, I have to teach now, okay? Just don't. I've been there, I've done that. I don't want to buzz like that ever again. Eh? I mean, it was such a buzz. The middleman, the quintessential manifestation of the mediator, and to really understand that no experience is selfish. And it's one of the things that I like, actually, about the collective process. That experience can never be selfish. And of course, it takes the transpersonal quality in that sense to bring that out. It's a 4th line theme. And it really means that the goal of the 4th line experience is to be able to bring together the extremities, if you will, of the collective. See, it doesn't matter whether your experience is over here or your experience is over there. That somewhere within the 4th line being, because they are natural networkers, is a way to see how this and this actually come together in something larger. It's only a 4th line being who knows how to speak to that person over there and that person over there and find a way to fix common ground. And this is ultimately the work of the 4th line being. The difficulty for the not-self 4th line being is that they assume they're an authority. They have a harmony to the 1st line theme. So what they tend to do is they tend to have a hard line in the center of things. And that the not-self 4th line being is always trying to pull people to their center. But the true 4th line experience is to bring extremities to a commonality. To a commonality without the 4th line being giving up their position. It's just about being able to see out of their position how they can network to either side and bring them together. In other words, it's like the comment I made yesterday about this, these holy guys who were commenting on John Paul's death. And one of them said, well, we all share one thing in common. We all share the worship of the Father. This is the kind of thing that only a 4th line being can say. And only a 4th line being has a chance to make that stick. So it's very important to see what the 4th line collective responsibility is. It's to try to create this umbrella in which there's room for diversity, but room for diversity within an overall picture, an overall framework. And of course, it takes a long time. It takes a long time. This is all about maturity. It takes a long time for the consciousness to mature because, as you can see, consciousness is the direct result of practice. And the longer you practice, the better you get, the more comfortable you are, the more relaxed you are. The moment that you settle into the choicelessness of your life, you'll already see how easy it is for you to accept the mundane. And remember, when I say the acceptance of the mundane, it's not about you're serene as you do everything. That you're walking around with a blissed out look on your face. It's not about that. It's not about changing your characteristics of whether your potential is anger or frustration or bitterness or disappointment, or you're an emotional bomb, or you're a buzzing sacral, or whatever the hell it is. There's all these things. It's not about that. It's simply about the surrender to the simplicity of what life is. Because most of life is simple. It's simple. And at the moment that you begin to practice that simplicity as an accepted way, you get to see it's not simple at all. It's really beautiful. There are so many things to see and to grasp in the very, very simple programs that we have each day. Why do you dress the way you do in the morning? Do you pay attention while you do that? I mean, do you know what you're doing? Do you know what kind of energy you're putting out? Do you know what kind of energy you're going to take in? Why one color one day and another color another day? And why this combination or that? I mean, there are zillions of little things in life we stopped thinking about a long time ago. You know, I watch that with my little boy. He's very interested in what he puts on every day because he can put it on himself. You know? And he likes it because his brother's a clothes horse, so he likes it. You know, it's like I'm gonna look really good too, you know? And then when I watch him and I see his joy in all of that, I realize, where's mine? I open my cupboard. It's just black, right? But you know, I have a game that I play with myself. What message am I going to wear today? You know? And I'm very aware of the messages that I'm wearing. And it becomes a part of my ritual of, you know, the way in which I am going to appear is not something that I'm bored with. It's not something that I'm doing because I'm covering my flesh. It's something that I can get back to at least some. I'm a lot older. Some of the joy of what that is. And there's joy in all these things. All of them. And it's not, again, it's not this kind of, oh, well, that's great, you know. It's just this, it just feels good. It feels good to see that whatever life is, it's worthy. It's worthy of experiencing, of living, of taking in. You know, there's all kinds of people running around thinking that they're missing stuff. You know, I missed out on this and I missed out on that and I'm missing this. You know, I'm missing it because I'm here stuck at home with my life, whatever that happens to be. Well, it's not true. We have no choice over where we are. You know, the place where you are, that's the place where you are. You might as well take advantage of it, whatever it happens to be. You know, it's one of the great pleasures for me that domestic life for so many people is so difficult. And I've watched people in human design who can actually accept their domestic life because of its choicelessness, because they can just deal with it as themselves, and the hooks disappear. There's all these hooks that disappear. The not-self is always ready to say that life isn't what it should be, instead of seeing that life is exactly what it is. What it is. You know, and it's that isness, that itness that's for us to embrace. The abstract teaches us that. Okay, the fifth line. Great fifth line. Self-actualization. Hey, that's what the heretic is here to bring you. Assertion. Assertion leading to self-actualization. So not only when they say to me, I got through the 7 years and I go, see? You know, what that means is that their self, their true self, is what can come out. And the heretical collective being is here to assert the importance of self-actualization. You know, this is transcendence. Your authority, out of your authority. Remember that if you're looking at this channel, and of course, in the sense of the larger aura of the planet, everything's always defined. You know, this is the totality. You know, when you look at this and you see that this channel is something that is there, that is fixed, that it's clear to see that transcendence is something that is built into the collective process. And it's built into the collective process to ultimately result in you being your authority out of your unique experience. Whatever that experience is. I mean, how many other people ever told you that dishwashing story? Do you know what I mean? It is this self-actualization and the assertion of consciousness through the self-actualization. It's the goal of the collective. And then, of course, we have the classic 6. The only thing worth nurturing is the phasing that goes with one stage to the next. We're here to nurture humanity into being mutative and transcendent. I mean, after all, otherwise 6 lines are never going to be the role models that we need. They're not going to be the trusted leaders that they're designed to be. You know, this is why they are under this mutative pressure. This is why they are being biologically oriented towards a higher consciousness. So this nurturing is very important. You know, it is the ultimate role of the collective 6th line, is to nurture transcendence in others. And that the only way that you can nurture transcendence in others is to get them to accept that practice at any level, of any aspect of the experience of being, is holy and perfect. This is the magic. I mean, one of the things that I liked about the way some people talked about John Paul's death was this comment about the beauty and the sanctity of suffering. Now, not that I'm a fan of suffering, but it is a way of grasping that it doesn't really matter what the experience is, because the experience is an illusion. It doesn't matter what it is, but it is how we take that experience in, how we deal with that experience, whatever it may be. And that every single experience, because this is the deepest collective teaching, every single experience is a gateway to Satori, is a gateway to transcendence. You know, you can see that in the way in which the Zen mythos works, where they try to slap you with one hand, all that kind of games they play, little koans to try to snap your brain into place. Because anything mundane, a leaf falling in the wind can be the great Satori of your life if you get to see it. You have to see it. You see, and you don't see anything if you're responsible for your life. You can't. The moment you think you're responsible for your life, you're blind. You don't see it. You can't see it. And there is no transcendence. Everybody is trying to finish something so they can do something exciting. I can't wait. Next week I'm going to... And what about today? Oh no, next week it's really going to be, and it's going to be terrific. And then you see them after they come back from the thing after the next week, and it's like, next week there's something really terrific coming. It's right here, right now, all the time. That's the magic. And the collective knows this. See, the tribe doesn't know this. The tribe thinks that magic only happens on holidays. Really? I mean, this is the tribe, It's a holiday. Let's get together. There'll be magic, I mean, that's the tribe, And in their own way, yeah, all right, whatever. I mean, if you're all in the aura and you're all praying to something, yeah, it's quite a buzz. I mean, the moment you put a lot of auras together, it's quite a buzz. But you see, the collective is here to say, no. And of course, the tribe doesn't like that, because the tribe can control your transcendence on holidays. Yeah. And they don't like the fact that the collective says, look, I'm sorry, but you can get it on your own. You can get it at home. You can get it in any activity. And of course, this is deeply threatening. It's deeply threatening to the tribe. It's what split Christianity. The moment that people could print Bibles, people would buy them. They would have their own ability to interpret the gospel. And no longer were they being controlled by a priest who magically could tell them what the gospel was. and that they could differ in their opinion. Whoa. You know, the Catholic Church has been trying to recover from that forever. No, give it back to us. It's our authority, right? We know what God said. The collective, at its best, will wipe all of that away. It's why we have this great fear and resistance to globalization. You know, those tribal beings who are deeply enmeshed in the tribe, you know, this is a wave that stinks to them. It's scary. It's deeply threatening. Because ultimately the collective is here to show us clearly that each and every one of us are capable of transcendence in our own lives, in our own space, in our own way, in our own process.